No more teasing, guys. No more rumors. No more myth. No more dancing around the facts. Let's make it official. And not to place pressure on you, but it's game time. We got Robbie, we got Tony from Avalanches on the phone, and it's really, really good to catch up with you after a considerable amount of time away. And we'll dive into that with tongue firmly in cheek. But how do you guys feel now, knowing that people are about to hear music and it's all very real?
It's exciting, man, because it's been finished for a while, but it's not real until people get to hear it, So
it's still very surreal, even thinking that it's all going to happen now. Like there were lots of points where we thought it wasn't going to happen, and it's just amazing. We're pumped.
Yeah, you should, because look, let's just put everybody out of their misery right now that are eagerly anticipating. Not that anyone really cares what I think, but I'm going to tell them anyway. This record is a triumph. And I guess we're just going to go into it because this is the first official interview, so let's leave nothing out of the room. I mean, there's 21 sort of segment songs, pieces of music, moods, feelings that flow through this album. There's some incredible, tasteful collaborations on this record, and it is called, gentlemen, the album is officially called what?
It's called Wildflower.
Wildflower.
It's called Wildflower. Now, what inspired you to call it Wildflower?
I think we just wanted something that actually wasn't too descriptive. It just had a good feeling, because we wanted the music to be the main thing. Like sometimes you could give a record a title that was trying too hard to paint a certain picture. We just love, those old Beach Boys records like Smile and those really simple sort of titles. And we just wanted something simple so it wouldn't get in the way of the music.
And the artwork is great. I mean, where did that come from, that piece of art that people are going to be able to see very soon that really sums up Wildflower?
It was, we kind of drew it on a napkin one day and gave it to our art director. And we loved, Sly Stones, There's a Ride Going On.
Yeah.
So it's a kind of a direct nod to that cover. And that
just a bit more psychedelic.
Yeah, and that counterculture spirit, and that kind of rebellious, anything goes kind of thing that's captured in that Sly Stone record. It's so raw and honest, and we wanted to do something along those lines. And so we actually got a flag manufactured, like we didn't do it digitally, and photographed it. Actually, a lady in Nebraska made the flag. She's like a quilting...
She's the world quilting champion.
Yeah.
Are you serious?
Yeah. No, we only get the best in Avalanche. Not the second place, not the third place.
That's awesome. So we're going to talk about Frankie Sinatra in a second, which is the only thing that we've had a chance to really play right now, which features Danny Brown and MF Doom with Jean-Michel Bernard on it as well, which is, what a combination. But what is the oldest piece of music on the album that you, to memory, can identify as being like, okay, that was the earliest idea that made it onto the record? And when was that idea actually sort of first put together?
Actually, Frankie Sinatra is one of the older ones. I used to play that Calypso record. We had a club night running in Melbourne called Brains, and I used to play that record there. And then the more I heard it, the more I thought, maybe
there's something in this.
There's something in this. It's kind of strangely repetitive and annoying.
Yeah. The first time he played it to me, he just kept playing it over and over, and I was just like, I really don't like this. I don't know what's going on. And then the more I listen, I'm like, actually, there's something in this. This is okay. So he finally got me after 2 years, so hopefully it doesn't take that long with everyone else.
It's a smash hit. So let's talk about getting Danny Brown and MF Doom together and working with those guys, and because I want to talk in detail about some of the collaborators on this record, because again, I just think you've chosen some amazing people, some unexpected people too. Danny's one of the most compelling voices in rap music right now. His energy, his tone, he has that high tone, which is really, it's not common these days. Very few great rappers who have adopted that high tone. He does it brilliantly. So tell us about how that collaboration happened.
We wanted to make this record to still sound like us, but to be a bit more loose and rock and roll. So we were kind of thinking of making, like, the initial plan was to make like a crazy loose sort of rock record, but with samples. And Danny's one of those guys, his voice is almost like a punk rock voice sometimes, So we just kind of thought he'd be perfect, but of course we just thought, he would never have heard of us, and this is never going to happen. But I think his manager knew Since I Left You album very well, and Danny listened to that album a lot. And we sent him the track, and it just started to turn out really well. Then he flew to Melbourne, and we worked some more on that, and another track called The Was It It Is. So
he came out recently Was he talking to Richard Kingsmill? Is that who he was talking to at the time?
Yeah.
And he was like, yeah, I've done a record with Avalanches. This is awesome. Wait till you hear it. And all of a sudden, everyone was like, oh, interesting. Nice how Danny just announced that they were officially coming back. So did you know that that was going to happen? I mean, where were you when you found out that he'd pretty much let the cat out the bag?
No, I think things like that have just kept happening. I think people, Jennifer from Royal Trucks, people were asking her questions and people asking Danny questions. And personally, we didn't mind because we just wanted
We want people to know.
Yeah, we wanted to get this record out as quickly as possible. That sounds weird.
And that leads us nicely into the elephant in the room, which we need to address. Let's just get this done. 16 years ago, you released a record, and it really was, and it remains to this day, a timeless debut album. I mean, there's a reason why people haven't forgotten about you, as cheeky as, your comeback title is since they left us. In that time, we need to find out what's been going on. I mean, that is what people want to know, is why has it taken so long through all the rumor and myth about the record? I'm sure you're prepared for this question. So what's been happening in 16 years?
Well, I think for us, we just kept making music, which we'd always done and probably always will do. But there was just so much of it and so many different projects going on. At a certain point, we realised we kind of need to pull an Avalanches record together out of all this stuff we've been making. We initially were working on some music with Luke Steele from an Australian band, Sleepy Jackson, and he'd fly over from Perth, and this is before sort of Empire of the Sun days. So we were sort of making some tripped out sort of rock and roll with Luke, and Luke was singing and Tony was singing, and some remnants of that kind of made this record with, the song Colours, that sort of feeling. And then we worked on some music for King Kong soundtrack, a theatre production. That was pretty time-consuming. That took a couple of years.
Yeah.
And we worked on an animation project, which was kind of going to be sort of a hip-hop version of the Beatles' Yellow Submarine. So a tripped-out, old-school cell animation with a whole album to come along with it. So a movie, basically. That was a massive, massive task, and the funding fell through for that about 2 years into the project. But the song Noisy Eater kind of remains from that project. That was kind of the feeling of that psychedelic animated cartoon.
I mean, the way that you describe it, it sounds like the most brilliantly fun 16 years of your life.
Yeah, I mean, but it was like this before, since I left U2, just making stuff. We just, that's sort of what we do. And at a certain point, it was this bunch of stuff is feels like a record, and that was since I left you. And we keep making music, which is just what we've chosen to do, with our time on this planet.
Yep.
And it just took longer and longer for it to form into the shape of this album. It's it was almost too much stuff. Well, we could have picked another 20 songs and it would have been a completely different record, So that was kind of the hard part.
A lot of difference between a lot of songs on the record, and trying to get them all to sound like they're part of the one thing was quite a hard process too.
So there's a vault with a whole lot of music in it.
Oh, there's a vault. And we never want to listen to that vault again. That's gone now. It's in the past.
You say that now.
Until one of us dies, and then it'll come out.
So, you're making this record, and when did you feel it start to take shape? Give us somewhat of a timeline as to when you felt okay, actually, we may be able to deliver on an Avalanches album here. It may not just be this never-ending creative cycle.
I think about three or 4 years ago.
I was going to say 5.
But we actually booked some studio time in a proper studio, and we were unless we kind of get into a studio that we have to pay for
and to force ourselves to finish the songs properly, to commit to finishing them. It just wasn't going to happen.
Did the success of Since I Left You, the touring that followed, the fact that, you became in some respects somewhat of a conventional group, you became a touring band and you won awards and did amazing videos and all these things that emerged out of, like you say, a very sort of open creative process. How was that time? We've never spoken about that time. Was it a good time? Was it a stressful time? When you look back on it now, what was that sort of few years that surrounded this award-winning amazing debut album?
Well, the live stuff was quite difficult, I think, because some Avalanches shows when we were starting out were 2 people DJing, or a party was an Avalanches show, and sometimes it was a band with 4 people or 6 people, or it was just never a concrete thing. And then after that record, it was trying to sort of fit this loose thing into a format that could perform night after night, but put on a a professional sort of show, and we just weren't really built for that, I don't think. So, we did a European tour that like conked out after 7 nights, I think. Like Darren broke his leg, and then we kept DJing after that. But I think just everything we'd done had been so spontaneous and so sort of fun that it was difficult to replicate that night after night.
It almost became less fun with, I guess, the more attention and more pressure.
Yeah, like people had heard this band, used to do these sort of wild shows in Australia, which was true, but they were quite rare events. And then you get booked on a massive touring schedule, and people, in London were coming along expecting to sort of see that night after night. And then it sort of became this strange situation where if nothing was getting smashed and
no legs broken.
Yeah, it was kind of
boring show.
People were feeling let down or something,
It must have been nice to get behind the decks, actually. I mean, not to obviously, try and find a silver lining in Darren breaking his leg, but ultimately just to be able to put it in a controlled environment where you can bring it back to almost where it began as opposed to what it's become.
Yeah, and that's like we love playing records, and that moment of being in a room with people and just playing music is like it's something we never want to lose. And at the moment, actually, we're figuring out, like, we're putting together a live band show, but we're also putting together a DJ show for these upcoming shows in Europe. I think kicks off at Primavera. Yeah, so we're still trying to have the best of both worlds and be able to allow Avalanche shows to be anything, a DJ show or a live band or whatever we feel, because we enjoy both equally.
This is Avalanches. This is you, Robbie. This is you, Tony, and of course there's James as well. Who I believe is back in the fold somewhat in some way, shape, or form. Who's a DJ in his own right and does his own thing. So, but it's not the same group that was in photos when it first came out. And Darren was up front for most of these. I think a lot of people thought Darren was like some guy. He was like the lead singer or something of this band when it first came out. It was kind of interesting the way it did it. And what was the thinking behind that? I know you toured as that band, but what was the thinking behind presenting it as that band and presenting that image, considering that it really was quite far from the truth in some respects as to how the record got made?
Yeah, no, it's always been kind of a difficult question to answer. For me personally, the Avalanches is just the music. It's not myself or Tony or anyone. It's what happens when you find a record that might be 50 years old and sample that and combine that with other old records, and then that sort of filters through Tony and I, and then it gets played on your radio show, and then someone listens to it, and that whole cycle of music.
We're all Avalanches.
We're all Avalanches, That's been, for me, it's just been about the music, and we were in touring mode at that time when those photos were taken, so there was a big sort of gang of us, but it's always been, just a couple of people making the music. And Darren was actually brilliant because, especially when I was younger, I was, pretty... I struggled with, the media stuff and all that kind of stuff. And he's a very charismatic guy, very confident, very funny. So it was a really good relationship where he would sort of support me and take a lot of that load off.
When you think back about that record now, and I'm going to ask you a question, I ask a few musicians, I'm always surprised by the answer, but have either of you actually listened to Since I Left You at any point in the time since it was released? And have you gone back in that moment and relived that record, just from a listener's point of view?
Probably twice, I think.
It took a long time, but I when I eventually did, I thought, I understand why people like it, because it was from the heart.
It really was a comprehensive document of how you can weave and create emotion out of existing music and create something fresh and new.
I think you nailed it there with the word emotion. It's like we weren't trying to sound big or huge or make these enormous beats. It was just like trying to capture a feeling, and it's that feeling that's in Beach Boys records, that we loved when we were kids. How something can be happy and sad at the same time, that beautiful sweet spot, that melancholy kind of feeling.
Like Nowhere Man by the Beatles.
Oh, it's the best. It's the best. It's like every Jam and Lewis record ever made. You're bawling your eyes out while you're dancing your ass off.
That's it, and that's that feeling, and that's what we were sort of chasing. And I think that's what I meant when I said I wasn't completely satisfied with that whole album. There was moments where we hit that spot, and for me, that was like, that's what we were trying to do. And it's really difficult to do with using samples.